Welcome to the Life and Times of Captain Barney Miller podcast. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me, of course, is the rookie, Mr. Chris Stashew.
I wonder how much longer that title's going to stick because this is the last time we're doing this before it's the literal last time we do this. So,
and coming to us all the way from the Uptown division, the internal affairs, as it were, Mr. Otto Bruno.
Geez, I'd rather be the inspector than
Scanlon?
Internal affairs than Scanlon, yeah.
Oh man, we're going to get a lot of good Luger in this episode of the Life and Times of Captain Barney Miller. I'll tell you that. We are talking about the last 3 episodes of the 7th season. I can't believe we're here already. Don't worry, folks. There's an 8th season. We're going to talk about some cliffhangers here. At least I'd like to consider the last episode a cliffhanger. We are talking about Vestss, which is going to be tough to say. That dropped May 7th, 1981. The Rainmaker, which came out May 14th, 1981. And Liquidation, which aired May 21st, 1981. Those are the last 3 of the 7th season. Of course, we've got our friend Noam Pitlick, who has directed, I think, almost every single frickin' episode of this season. I think there were like 1 or 2 that he didn't. Yeah, Homer Powell was in there, but this has been a Noam season. This has been an interesting season. We've talked about how things are carrying over. These 3 episodes really play well together. But yeah, Chris, what did you think of the Vestss?
I thought it was a pretty good episode of the show. I mean, again, I think in terms of what we talked about on the last episode, in terms of this being a very typical episode of the show, it felt very typical. It felt like the kinds of storylines that we've seen throughout the run of the show. We have the A plot being the bulletproof vests or Kevlar that they're getting. That, I guess, I didn't realize this, but Kevlar looked ridiculous back in the day in terms of the design. And I love that as a plot because, again, it kind of begs the question why they didn't have them up until this point. It's because New York City is and was having problems with, or was, not is, but in this show, it's having problems with, clearly police and the police being shot at and being, maimed and murdered. So I liked it. I mean, again, it's kind of trafficking in real world-ism, because this is a show that has never needed to explain why nobody had bulletproof vests up until this point, even though they've gone out multiple times on multiple calls where there are people with guns, especially this season where we've had people murdered in the first episode of the goddamn season. So I thought it was interesting that we're finally in like the end of the 7th season and we're finally now talking about bulletproof vests. But I mean, outside of that, I thought it was an interesting episode, and the Luger of it all, I think, is a lot of fun.
And Otto, what did you think of the Vestss?
Well, I watched all 3 again today, and I felt, none of these are great classic Barney Miller episodes, but the thing that always impresses me is I laughed at something in every single one. Every single one was able to make me laugh. Now, in one like the Vestss, you have Barney Miller favorite Don Calfa, who is on in what is probably his weakest role.
Totally.
Throughout all the series. He doesn't really get to do much at all in this. So that particular storyline didn't really go anywhere. The lady at the end who was held up with all her weaponry supposedly in her apartment, I thought was pretty funny at the end, but it's very short. I mean, it's that is more like a C plot, and that really is over and done with in 3 or 4 minutes. So the main plot, which is the bulletproof vests, carries the story. And I think it sounds like all 3 of us will agree on the best part of that plot was Luger.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Luger, and then you don't even know for the first 5 minutes of the episode, more than that, actually, that Dietrich is even in the office. It takes until Luger comes in and he's talking with the guys and this and that. And then he's like, I'm going to interview all of you just in case I have to write your obituaries. Talk about morbid. And then they're like, we'll start with Dietrich. And then he just goes around to Dietrich's desk, and Dietrich is sitting there. I was like, you didn't even give him a shot at the beginning. It was so oddly directed, this episode. And then, of course, Dietrich, they do a cutaway and then come back to him, and he's like talking about like what Schopenhauer and all of these things. He's like, I just asked if you had a dog when you were a kid. So good.
Well, I love Dietrich and the inspector together, I think, are always priceless because, Dietrich, I mean, this is the whole humor behind Dietrich, is that dry delivery he has, dry, sarcastic delivery, but he's never outwardly disrespectful to the inspector as Harris can sometimes be.
Oh boy, yeah. And there was a lot of that in these episodes.
Right, yeah. Exactly. So I think it's even funnier, because he's not being openly hostile, but he's still driving him crazy. So he's getting him in a different way, I like that.
And it's kind of interesting too that the lady who was shooting and that caused them all to wear their vests, that she was a former mental patient. Absolutely no problem apparently getting all these guns. So, what was going on in 1981, same thing in 2024.
I tell you, it's still relevant to show that
it is.
That is the best and the worst part of this series, as how frighteningly relevant so many of the issues still are.
And you know what? If Don Calfa's character was around today, he'd be trying to go on to Shark Tank with his crazy invention that he has that tells you when you're tan enough, which I'm like, okay, that it might actually be a handy device. Probably not. But this whole, I am a sucker for these fly-by-night companies, and that he gives them all this money, and then that causes him to go, he goes a little nuts because he's like, hey, what the hell's going on with this invention that I paid you all this money for? And then I love it. Who was it? Is it Harris or is it Dietrich that looks into the company itself and is just like, hey, you guys are getting sued all over the place. And just the way that they kind of out the guy who owns the company in front of Calfa, I thought was pretty darn good.
I think it was Wojo, wasn't it?
Was it Wojo? Okay, good.
Yeah, it was Wojo.
I thought.
All right, that seems like a good Wojo. Wojo in Crusader mode, which happens again in another one. And
right,
yeah, proper Wojo appearance. And then I like his whole thing too. How he's like, I don't want to wear a vest, and then he and Harris are kind of fighting over a vest. He eventually does wear the vest. And he's just like, no, I'm giving it up because it makes you feel invincible. And I don't need that. I don't want to feel like I'm a superhuman person when I'm in these situations, because I might not value the other person's life as much as I value my own life.
Yeah. And I always found that expression of concern for what he might do to a perp very interesting in the age of Dirty Harry and Death Wish and all those things.
Well, that he's a Vietnam vet, and he didn't have a vest on when he was in Vietnam, but he had to do what he had to do. I'm sure Wojo probably took some lives when he was in the war.
Oh, I mean, if things are to be believed, family friends have told us stories about Vietnam vets going out in the middle of the night to kill Viet Cong for fun. So, Wojo's probably seen. Yeah, well, that wasn't the worst part. The worst part is they would come back with ears on a string around their neck. Yeah. And it drives people crazy. I mean, what's funny is that Wojo is so well adjusted as a character, because now if you wrote him as a character, there would be a lot more to mine, and the show has never gone there, and we understand why. But I will say, Otto, we have invoked your name plenty of times, and I think we now realize you are not like Beetlejuice. You will not show up if your name is mentioned 3 times in a row, unfortunately. But this season has been interesting, and you talk about it in your book, which can be found at Bear Manor Media, by the way, and it's a great pickup if you haven't read it. This is your least favorite season of the show, right?
Yes, I felt it's the weakest season beyond the first, because the first season
it doesn't count. Yeah,
right. I don't count the first season because it was first of all, it was a mid-season replacement. Second of all, they were basically finding their sea legs in the first 13 episodes. So I don't count that. But yeah, I mean, but you and I think have talked about this, and Mike, for me, it's the weakest season in a series of almost perfectly strong seasons all the way through.
Right.
So, when you're comparing it to everything else, yeah, I think it was the weakest season overall in terms of the stories. But it's still, like I said, even in these 3 episodes, none of which are super strong, except the last one, which Mike hinted towards, is certainly an important episode. But there are laughs to be found in all of them. And like I said, and I think I said it in the book. I'm sure I said it in the book. The thing about this show that was so, for me, that I felt stood out from so many of the great sitcoms of the 1970s, because particularly the first half of the 70s was almost like a renaissance of the golden age of television in terms of the shows that came out. By the end of the 70s, not so much, but the first half of the 70s, you have Barney Miller, MASH, All in the Family.
I mean, that right there is enough, right?
Yeah, Bob Newhart. I mean, it's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
So, but the 2 that it always kind of bothered me, although I liked them both and I thought they were both great shows, but it always bothered me that MASH and All in the Family seemed to be held above all other shows in that decade. And I thought Barney, quite honestly, was just as good. And I thought Barney was better in the sense of being a sitcom because it never gave up the focus on providing laughs.
Right.
Okay. So it could do, and we will see this in the last episode we're going to talk about tonight. It could get very serious, but it would always provide the laughs. As I've said, I'm sure I probably said it on the show before, and I think you've already gone past it. There's only one episode, I think, could be wrong, but I think only one episode in the whole series where there's a subject that they just don't allow any laughter on whatsoever. And that was with the Nazi, the escaped Nazi.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, that was
joke store.
That was this season.
Yeah. With that was a powerful episode, and that was the only time I ever really remember them. There was nothing. I mean, and think about it. You've had, although it wasn't thought of the same way then as it is now, unfortunately, but you had an episode about a man raping his wife. It wasn't considered as terrible then because the culture didn't think it was a possible that it was they didn't think you could rape your wife. Obviously we know better, thankfully, now, but so you had that. You had a story with a slave, a guy who was still an indentured servant.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had some heavy things, but there was laughter in all of these things, even the slave one, which is amazing. If you think about it, I'm sure there are people who are listening to this who have never seen that and are already getting angry, but you have to see the episode to understand it. I don't think that episode is offensive because basically the whole thrust of the episode is Wojo and Harris trying to get justice for this guy at a time when he was the guy who was enslaving him was sort of protected from the immunity there.
Diplomatic immunity.
Diplomatic immunity, right? Exactly.
Well, and I mentioned your feelings on this season, and you kind of already alluded to it, Otto, which is this season I think has the most, and the rape episode aside, which still has a laugh track, to be fair. This season has had the most serious storylines, I think, in terms of volume. Like, it's been not just 1 or 2 episodes, because the rape episode's like 1 episode in a season of episodes that are not it's not that they're not that serious, but like that's a pretty fucking serious topic, serious episode title alone. But this season we've had a character that has been murdered off screen. And then it's talked about being shot point blank. That's like the first episode of the season, I think. We have the precinct being broken into, which also has not happened up until this point. The violence has come into the precinct a couple times, but not like this, which was, what was that, Riot? The one where the guy looks in like a spaceman.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the other. I'm trying to think if there were at least 1 or 2. Well, the Agent Orange episode this season was another kind of hot button issue at the time. And then this is also the season, Mike, let's not forget that had fucking Dorsey on top of everything else, which
Jesus, such a major misstep with that.
I mean, in a lot of ways, like Dorsey ends up feeling like, unless season 8 just does something absurd, Dorsey is the biggest misstep this show has ever done, other than spinning Fish off into his own show. But I say all of this because, again, in my mind, this season is so different in the way it approaches the serious topics, because not that they're not funny, but to your point, Otto, up until this season, there has been some room for comedy in the serious episodes. And this season, a lot of the serious episodes have not had a lot of ha-ha guffaw moments, which feels antithetical to a show like this, which, to your point, Otto, has been funny throughout.
Yeah.
It's really, in the next episode, in The Rainmaker, it feels like it starts off like it's going to be a big message thing where they haven't had rain in New York for a while and the reservoirs are getting lower, and Wojo comes up to Barney. He's just like, hey, there's, we're going to run out of water. And he was trying to make coffee with Dr. Pepper.
Which is just the fucking worst, by the way, Wojo. You psychopath. It's warm Dr. Pepper, Barney. Oh yeah, I guess that was technically a thing in the 70s. That was a thing that people liked. So
the number 2 beverage, even here in 2024. Right behind Coca-Cola. Man, Joan Crawford would be apoplectic if she heard that.
I'm a pepper, he's a pepper, she's a pepper, you're a pepper. No.
It's all those psychos in Mississippi ordering Dr. Pepper with pickles in it. That's what it is. That's what's really.
What are these things?
Yeah. There's like a trend, I guess, in Mississippi of getting a Dr. Pepper and then them putting pickle slices in on top, to the point where Sonic knows it's a thing and will be like, well, you're gonna find your pickles on top of your drink. Like, they know that.
Wow.
Yeah. Don't ask me. I lived in Texas for a long time. That is the South technically. I have never heard of that shit, so don't ask me about it. But Dr. Pepper warm was a thing. I know it was a thing. Straight up.
I know.
Yeah,
I know Coke and Pepsi was, but
that sounds okay. I mean, it's like a float, but weirder.
Well, and then we've got Ron Carey coming in, and he has a brick for Barney, and I'm like, okay, what is this? And then finally I figured out, oh yeah, you put it in the toilet tank, and they explained that, thank goodness.
Yeah.
As opposed to the opening gag, which is Harris interviewing a person who's going through the mug books. This person is played by Beatrice Colin, our old friend Jane Plum from Kolchak the Night Stalker, Chris. The famous in the what episode was she in? The Ripper episode.
Oh, yeah.
Way back. She was one of those crazy dames that Kolchak couldn't stand.
Those broads. Those damn broads.
So good. I mean, she was like the one. I remember us being like, oh, she should be like a full-time person on here and almost be his rival or something. Like, I wanted more of her.
Not to wax nostalgically, but Mike, the Ripper was the first episode of Kolchak the Night Stalker, which means we talked about it in 2015.
Jeez.
At this point. Yeah. Fuck is the only preferred term. Yeah, the Ripper was the first episode of Kolchak. Jesus.
Wow.
Yep.
And if I'm not mistaken, and I'm not, because I just looked it up, if you get the book Barney Miller and the Files of the Old One too, wonderful book.
Guy who
right now on bearmanormedia.com.
These ads are free, by the way. You're not having to pay anything.
But I didn't have it in this particular episode, but I know earlier in the book I write Beatrice Colin is the granddaughter of George S. Kaufman.
Okay. You want to explain that to our audience? And
please, Chris, no.
I have no idea.
No. Do not tell me you two do not know who Kaufman and Hart are.
Oh, Kaufman and Hart, they were playwrights.
Yeah.
Okay.
Two of the greatest playwrights of all time.
Okay, sorry, I didn't recognize the author of You Can't Take It With You by name.
Yeah.
The man who came to dinner.
The man who came to dinner. It's one of my
Look at Otto assuming that we're smart and well knowledge about pre-code things.
No,
I did assume that. I did assume that. Well, Chris,
Otto, you
you're still
skew
the
a little.
kid, but
You skew a little older than even Mike does, Otto. Don't forget.
Chris, you're of course the baby in the group, but I figured Mike's at least 50 now. I thought he might know.
At least 50.
At least 50, eh? God.
Well, I know he's got to be 50. I think he's 8 years younger than I am.
Not a day over.
7 years.
Not a
younger
day
than I
over
am.
25.
Oh, he's 7 years younger than I am. I thought he was 8 years younger than I am. So
You just looked that up on Wikipedia?
Look at Mike White's age.
no, I just remembered. No.
I will say I'm glad to see Violet Beauregard's father is the
Leonard Stone. Yes.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say
Violet.
Oh,
Violet.
Oh, from Willy Wonka.
Willy Wonka in
yeah.
the Chocolate Factory. Yeah.
You don't know that one, Otto?
No,
Come
I
on.
do. I know
1971.
very well.
We're right here. We're
No, I know that.
yeah.
Leonard Stone always played the great harried bureaucrat on Barney Miller.
Oh, yes. And he is wonderful in that role. And he's doing the exact same thing here. It's an interesting reveal that they find this guy played by J. Pat O'Malley, who we've seen also on Kolchak the Night Stalker. We're really getting, and plus major role, Chris, in the Gumball Rally, which we talked about on the Mercedes team. He's been on this before, been on Barney at least once, if not twice. I'm trying
two other times.
He was.
Okay.
I think he was in a total of 3, if I'm not mistaken.
Season 2,
And-
season 5, and season 7.
Yeah.
Of course, as a growing up with Disney movies, I'm very familiar with him from all of the voices he did. He would be multiple voices in a lot of movies like Alice in Wonderland, The Jungle Book, 101 Dalmatians. Gosh, I'm trying to remember what else. He was just in a bunch of stuff. He's in the park doing this ritual to try to make it rain. First, you don't know what the ritual is, that there's a weirdo setting a fire in a park and they run and grab him. And then they talk about this ritual that he's doing. And then you find out that he's a rainmaker. And then the twist that continues it is that he was hired by the city, hired by Leonard Stone to help make it rain. And of course, Stone is just like, oh my God, nobody can find out about this until it then starts to rain. And he runs back in and provides the proof to Barney. He was basically selling out for Mr. O'Malley, and eventually does the right thing. And then he starts talking about how he's going to be the hero at City Hall.
Yeah. He says, oh my God, no one will believe it. And Barney's like, yeah, you're probably right.
Mm-hmm.
And then his face just falls.
I would like to see the sequel to this episode. I'd like to see, because at the very end, Beatrice Colin, who, man, oh man, you could see that joke coming a mile away when she starts talking about how things in the States are so different and yada, yada, yada. And you're just listening to her and you're like, she sounds very American. And of course, I'm just like, oh, she's Canadian. And then when they finally reveal it, and it's just like, okay. And then they continue to beat that joke into the fucking ground, man. Oh my God.
Well, Canadians are so different from us, don't you know? It's so different up there. Just a couple miles north, and everything's different.
And she should have given us at least one a boot. Or like talk about the washroom or something. Yeah.
A couple sorries out there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Let me check my schedule. Yeah, those kind of things.
Wow, that's a deep cut shit.
Do they use schedule A?
I think they do, yeah. I'm trying to think of some very other Canadianisms because
Tim Hose.
Pick them up. Yeah.
Tim Hose.
I probably have many of them integrated into my own speech pattern just because I'm so close. And she's from Windsor, which I found to be very
Yeah.
But yeah, at the very end of the episode, she and J. Pat O'Malley team up and he's going to teach her the rainmaking business. That's what I want to see. Where was that as the summer replacement on ABC in 1981?
Well, the real question that I have is, where did Harris get his fucking outfit this episode?
Oh my God.
Because to quote Jack Black from High Fidelity, that is a Cosby sweater. A Cosby sweater. Oh my God. Harris, who has the best fashion sense of anybody other than J. Pat O'Malley with that fucking bolo tie. Am I right? Am I right?
Yeah.
But he's wearing one of the most hideous sweaters I have. It looks like if you've ever worked or laid down carpet, it looks like the pad that's underneath the carpet. It's awful. It's just, you should be I know you're going through some tough times, Harris, but my God, that sweater is atrocious.
And before we get away from J. Pat, because I'm a big fan of J. Pat O'Malley. I love J. Pat O'Malley, one of the great character actors. In the three, we mentioned he played 3 roles on Barney. Every one of J. Pat O'Malley's roles was a quote-unquote criminal that you actually root for. He was never a malevolent. It wouldn't be possible for him.
Right. He's too charming of an old little man.
Right. Exactly. And all of the appearances he made, I thought were great, though.
I was very unfamiliar with Bruce McVitie, who plays the guy who actually ripped off Beatrice Colin.
Right.
And the guy was in like 97 things. I think he just passed away in 2022. So there are still like shows that are airing now that his episodes are still pretty fresh, but I just didn't recognize him at all. I'm glad that they didn't go back to the well and get, A. Martinez to come back again to play that same character, but he's basically playing that same kind of scuzzy Mexican Puerto Rican type character that rips off people.
Was he? I don't remember. I didn't even think he was Hispanic, was he?
Well, hopefully I'm saying the right person's name. Bruce McVitie, is he the guy that ripped off?
Was he supposed to be a Hispanic? I don't remember the character's name.
Oh, what was the character's name? Gerald Clayton does not sound Hispanic or at all, but maybe he wasn't, but he just is dressed so much the same with the jean vest and everything. I just assumed maybe that was very racist of me.
I didn't. Yeah, I had no idea.
I was expecting it to be Paul Lieberman again, just shows up and he's just once again doing the same thing. Like, why are you here, Dorsey? What are you doing?
By the way, here's something interesting, Mike. It was the first thing he ever did.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, maybe that's why he seems a little green, because he just didn't capture me like some of the other actors do on this show. It feels like everybody that they bring in through those doors is somebody or would be somebody or somebody that I'm familiar with. But this one guy, I'm just like, I don't know who this is.
And he was on something called The Oval, which apparently is still on, and I had never heard of it.
Is it about the Oval Office or just
I would assume.
It's about ovals. I really like
ovals.
I really like ovals, guys.
It's like the number 23 where I see ovals everywhere. Another oval.
Newly elected U.S. President Hunter Franklin and his family move into
Hunter
the White
Biden?
House.
What'd you say?
What his laptops? What? Guns? Felonies? What?
Laptop from hell? What?
Hunter Franklin, and it's got a 4.5 rating on IMDb. It's been on. They've already made 133 episodes.
What?
And it's and its creator. Do you want to guess who the creator is?
I hope it's somebody who's associated with right-wing conservative propaganda.
Belisario?
Oh, I don't think so. Tyler Perry.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
What the fuck? Oh, is this on the Medea network? Is that why we haven't heard of it?
I don't know.
It's bizarre. I guess there's just so much shit on TV now.
I haven't had cable for years now. So I if it's not on one of the platforms that I have, I don't know anything about
one of the multiple platforms that exist out there. I mean, that's the other thing about Barney is this feels like a thing that obviously was like you would talk about this with people at your job. Now it's like, what the hell do you talk about? There's so many things. And I mean, look, the fact that this show is still relevant in 2024, I think speaks more to an idea that they've never, I don't think I've seen a cop show done as well as this show. In terms of actually speaking to the idea of like what it would be like to be a police officer at a certain time in a certain place. And yeah, maybe we're not out on the streets with all the grittiness, but I mean, this resonated with, I mean, we're doing the show for a reason, obviously, but to your point, Otto, like the 70s were such a golden time for television that you really had to be operating at peak because Gregory Sierra left the show to go to his own show. That show didn't pan out. Abe Vigoda went to his own show, spun off from this show. It had 2 seasons. Yes, it did. But I mean, again, didn't have 8 seasons. So right. I think it's interesting. Like Barney Miller, I think stands the test of time because at the end of the day, like you've already alluded to, Otto, it's so funny, but I think the comedy just like all the stuff in this episode with the Rainmaker and like you could see that still today, those kinds of ideas, like again, paranoids with proof, quote unquote.
Right.
But this, I mean, the show's just basic premise. I think no other show has really done this as well, other than and what's funny is, and I saw it with our dear friend Richard Haddam because him and his family are huge fans of it. And when I was watching it, I was like, this kind of reminds me of Barney Miller. Was Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Which I don't think is that much of a stretch, but it's interesting because a lot of it takes place in the precinct, the bullpen, as it were. And all I could think when we were watching it was like, man, this just feels like Barney Miller for people my age.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I'm not saying like people y'all's age couldn't get into it, like far from it. It's just the kinds of jokes and the way they're being told seem a little bit more contemporary. But I think the timelessness of Barney Miller is what works for it ultimately in terms of like why it's still relevant, why, to your point, Otto, it's still mentioned with other shows that are considered. I mean, this is one of the best shows of all time, period. I mean, it's in the top 25 best shows of all time for a reason. And it's not a surprise we're talking about it, but I think that I appreciate the way that this show handles its subplots for the most part, because even when they don't hit, like in this episode with the thing you were talking about, Mike, there's still enough there. It doesn't just, I know sometimes shows just don't give you enough throughout every episode. And like you said, Otto, with the amount of jokes that do come through in this show, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like this show still works for a contemporary audience is what I'm trying to get at, which I don't think you can say about, I think MASH and All in the Family, but like there are plenty of shows from the 70s that do not work with contemporary audiences. Barney Miller, I think, is still one of them, even if people want to claim it's, quote, propaganda, unquote, which I mean,
I mean, heard that.
Yeah, propaganda is a term thrown around in terms of like, you know, obviously glorifying what police do. Often it comes with shooting bad guys, which Barney Miller's never really been about anyways. But that's the other thing is like so much of cop shows now are that kind of like propaganda where it's, you know, cops going out and shooting people or defusing situations. And it's not that we don't see it in Barney Miller, but Barney Miller was never really about that, which I think is why it's just a show that is as important, like you said, Otto, as important then as it is now.
Well, let me put on my old man hat for a minute, because I love donning that hat, and say that I actually watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine. My daughter and I used to watch it together because she liked it a lot, and I did like it. I watched it regularly, but if nothing else, I think it shows you the difference between the level of writing from this show to Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Now, I'm being serious. I enjoyed Brooklyn Nine-Nine and watched it regularly. However, the Brooklyn Nine-Nine characters were almost all caricatures.
Right.
Whereas Barney Miller, you know, they all have their idiosyncrasies, but they're all real people.
Right.
And that, I think, was part of the magic of the 1970s in the best of the sitcom.
Let the people who walk in and out of the precinct be the stereotypes and the weirdos. But yeah, leave our main characters. Let them be, like you're saying, real people.
Well, exactly. And I think I've said this to you guys before, because I always said this about Fish. The whole storyline they gave for the Fish spinoff was nonsensical to me. Like, why? I always used to say, if I was going to spin Fish off, I would have put him, he was forcibly retired from the police force, right? Okay, fine. Now go get a job as like a security guard somewhere, where you're going to have a bunch of goofy people to come in and play off of.
Send him to Boca Raton. Like, I never understood why they didn't just send him to Florida. Like, send him somewhere else. Like, what Abe Vigoda couldn't have worked into his contract. I want to go film somewhere other than New York. Like, I don't know. Like, we kind of, we didn't talk about it before we turned the recorder on. And I wanted to talk about it now. What a fucking bizarre episode we were subjected to, where Fish just comes back out of nowhere. And I want your take on it, Otto, because as the person who wrote the book on the goddamn thing, for us, it was Mike and I had the same reaction. What the fuck? And I still question that choice because it was a poor choice, to say the least, especially the way he walks out of the episode, showing his true colors as the asshole he always was. I didn't miss him, is what I realized in that episode, is that his comedy stylings had, the show had evolved past what Abe Vigoda brought to the show, which I think is a testament to the show.
I think it definitely had evolved beyond. Yes, that's true. It was an odd appearance. That was the one with oh God, I love that lady. Who was it? Peggy Pope.
Yep.
With the bomb.
With the bomb.
Right. Bomb. I mean, I certainly don't hate Fish's character. I think there was talk, after his show failed, there was talk about, people were saying, oh, will Fish come back to Barney Miller? Now, as I know I've mentioned on this show before in previous episodes, by the time Fish left, there was not a super great relationship with Danny Arnold, the producer.
Right.
So that was never going to happen. He was never going to he was never going to come back to Barney. And how would he anyway? Because he was forcibly retired. So I don't know how he would have come back anyway. He could have, worked for the inspector in the public relations office or something. I don't know. But, Fish wouldn't have done that anyway. So it wouldn't have made sense. So I don't know if this was just to kind of throw him a bone or what it was. But it does, because it is so late, too. It seems a little, a little strange. But it was also a way, I guess, to tie up his storyline because, he mentions that the city ran out of funding and closed up. He and Bernice weren't running the house for the foster house
and
anymore.
The children get really dark outcomes for their stories, too, which was like,
yeah,
we get it. You hated the show. Fuck it. Fine.
Well, look at
what was it? They found the little guy dead in a ditch, and the girl had turned to prostitution, right?
Or she got pregnant, or she's like 14 and pregnant or something. It's like
right.
It's
she was forced to carry it to term. Right?
Yeah, it's such.
Yeah, look at. Here's the thing.
It was Fish's baby all along. That was the mid-season
really
twist.
Dark. Whoa.
They were shut down for a reason.
Wow. What is this? Some sort of satanic panic thing from the 80s too?
The House of the Fish by Ty West.
Capturing the fishes.
I spoke with Frank Dungan, Jeff Stein, and Tony Sheehan, who were the main writers in seasons 6 and 7. And I'm pretty maybe I never talked about this because we weren't up to that episode. But look at Chris, you alluded to it a few minutes ago. The two-parter that opens this season, the homicide episodes.
Yeah.
I talked to Tony Sheehan about this and said that from the day I saw it in 1980, it enraged me. I was angry. I felt betrayed. Okay? They didn't kill off a cop, but they killed off a recurring character who we had all come to know and love. And like you said, they did it in a very brutal way.
For this show, for any show even. Like, It's not even just for Barney Miller. It's just, this guy was murdered off screen by a shot at close range to his head. What? Barney, what? Like,
right. And that is the worst part of it. But then also the not great part of it, and even though, as I was just saying earlier, that, they always try to find humor. But when that was over, then it was like over. And it was like, it wasn't something that hung on with them. And I said to Tony, I'm like, and he said something to me to the effect like, well, we thought it might be funny. We thought because it was so ironic, they thought the irony might be funny because they were homicide and they couldn't, when they said, well, now we can help him. And I said,
what a hilarious joke to play.
Wow.
but what I write in the book was what it taught me, which I have learned a little bit over the years, and I'm sure Mike and Chris, you probably have too. I don't know if you've interviewed as many actors or actresses as Mike had, but I assume you have, you learn when you interview these people that it really is a job for them. And while they obviously get invested in a certain way, it's not the same way that the viewer gets invested in it.
Not at all.
And that was a real revelation to me, because I thought it was the biggest misstep of the entire series, was that episode where he gets killed. And I'm blanking on his name.
Is it Mr. Fetterman or something to that
no,
effect?
Cotterman.
Mr. Cotterman.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
Cotterman.
Good
Yeah. I thought that. Now, I always said that I thought that Wojo's Girl was the least funny episode, but the worst episode, the biggest mistake of an episode, was the one where Cotterman gets killed. It just totally misses the mark. So they did, they could go darker. Maybe it was because they were younger guys than Danny was, and maybe Danny was more rooted in, the traditional Borscht Belt sketch comedy or something like that. I don't know, but I mean, because to be fair to them, they also did a two-parter in this season, which I loved. And has always been one of my favorite ones, and that was the movie about the porno movie.
Oh yeah,
that Harris makes. I thought the viewing of the porno was one of the best scenes in the series.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. I think we even said as much on the episode.
Yeah.
Like it's a standout from this season, but I think from the show overall.
Yes, definitely.
It honestly feels like a missed opportunity that they didn't do more things like that, where it's like everybody kind of interacting with one thing specifically. Even.
Well, it was probably money too. Remember, you're paying more actors, so
it's true.
But it was. It doesn't hurt that it also had my all-time favorite Barney Miller perp in it, Mr. Roth. So he was never going to come back. And when he does come back in this episode, it's an odd interaction with them.
All of them. It's weird. It's weird. And it almost strikes me as like the people that used to know how to write this character don't write for the show anymore. And it's being handled by people that are like, it would be a lark to bring him back. I mean, the thing that's weird to me, as we're sitting here about to talk about the final episode of the 7th season of the show, is Fish doesn't come back for the end of the show, which is like that's the moment where like we're conditioned as film watchers, TV watchers, depending on how you want to interpret it, either as a final film in a trilogy or the final episode of a season or finale. You're going to pull out all the stops and bring as much back and do as much pandery fan service nonsense as possible. And it's shocking to me that Abe Vigoda shows up in just an episode in the 7th season. It's just an episode. Yeah. There's no fanfare given to it even. I mean, he just walks in and it's like, what did I transport back to 2019 or something all of a sudden?
Yeah.
That was like 2019, 2020 was like last time we talked about Abe Vigoda, really, in terms of like his presence on the show being really felt. So,
well, he had another guest.
It was when he was doing the fish stuff. It was kind of setting up the stuff with Fish.
Yeah, it was pretty close to when he spun off. So it wasn't like this where years had gone by.
No, it was like the next season or something, I think.
It would have been like if Gregory Sierra had walked through the door. It would be like, what the actual fuck?
Yeah. It would have been really weird. Jack Sue comes back.
Which is that would be break out the Ouija board, boys. The seance.
All you young kids have very dark senses of humor. Very dark people.
We do.
That's very true.
All you kids, very dark.
Speaking of dark people. No, not dark people, but just dark. Let's talk about the last episode of this season. Let's talk about Liquidation, which I thought when I saw Liquidation that it was going to have something to do with liquidating the police department or liquid funds or something. Oh boy.
Definitely not Harris dropping the N-word. That's for sure.
Oh my God.
It was like, I thought that's what you were alluding to here. Like the show finally went there. Season 7, final episode. It finally did it.
I couldn't believe that N-word. I was shocked. I was shocked. I mean, I remember just a few months ago, some friends of mine were sending me clips from Sanford and Son. It was just like, Fred Sanford said the N-word a lot on the show. I don't remember that. And like now when I watch those clips and when I think about it, I'm like, yeah, I guess he did. And that kind of makes sense. But at the same time, it just doesn't feel like a prime time word, and yeah. And then Harris just kind of dropping it out of nowhere. Though he spends, what is it, like half and half of this episode between being sober and being drunk. And I'm never a big fan of drunk acting, but I was okay with Harris doing this. I thought that Ron Glass did a pretty darn good job of being not only drunk, but just disgruntled, super angry. I mean, he's pissed. You know how important his bank account is to him. We have talked since some of the first episodes that he was even on about the stockbroker, the futures. I mean, he's always like investing in
gold
things,
coins,
gold coins, talking with Richard Libertini about the zinc in the future, that's all of these things. Yeah. The futures, the eggs that he had, just all of these things. And you know how well he likes to dress and all of this. To be wiped out financially has to be the worst thing in the world for him. He's going to have to start dressing at like freaking Kmart now, man.
Is that worse than having to listen to Walter Olkowitz sing? Is that worse?
Wow.
Oh, now, wait a minute. Now, wait. Before we get to
Jacques Renault himself, folks.
Yes.
Before we get to him singing, because I think that part is hilarious personally. But yeah, I mean, the obvious stunner in the episode is Harris's dropping of the N-word. But I say in the book, guys like me, we grew up in the 70s hearing that word. I used All in the Family in good times, but I forgot. Yeah, Fred used it all the time as well. And Fred, in fact, he might have used it the most now that you say that. So it wasn't as shocking in terms of the time period like it would now on anything, but it was very shocking for this show. One of the other things I've talked about in the book that you and you guys and I have talked about in previous episodes was, as we kind of hinted at earlier in this episode, it took that first season for them to kind of find their characters. And Harris was much more, I don't even know if I'm allowed to say
he was more jive.
Yes, thank you. That was exactly the word I wasn't sure if I could use.
No, it's okay. We know, Otto, you don't speak jive. But, it's fine. We'll get you a jive interpreter.
His mama didn't raise no dummy. He does rap.
Give me some slack, Jack.
Exactly. Right. So, so it was very. And what's interesting, Mike, is I happen to be someone who loves drunk and high scenes in shows if they're done well. I never thought he was that great as a drunk, but I always allowed it because I felt that, yes, he had to be enraged, but he couldn't come in as just sober Harris being enraged. It was easier to take it this way. You know what I mean?
That's true. That's very true. It's a very wise choice that they made to have him drunk through this. And even after he sleeps for a little bit, he's still drunk. But I think he's more angry at that point than he's drunk.
Well, and you can't get the joke of him pretending to look for his gun to shoot the guy with him sober either. Which is like, shit, if he thought he's just going to murder this poor bastard.
And of course, that's exactly what I've been talking about in this whole episode. That last part of it, those last few minutes or whatever, that Harris is just pouring all this stuff out and your heart's breaking for him, whatever. And it's really sad and dark and serious. And then you have what Danny Thomas used to call the treacle cutter, where he puts his head down on the table and he's just disgusted. He's on the verge of tears. And the guy who sings to overcome his anxiety starts singing High Hopes from the jail cell. As however much you could have anticipated that coming, I don't care. It's still funny. I knew it was coming and I still laughed. So
it's very funny. And that whole whoops, there it goes. And just the way that it goes on, they think they repeat that 3 or 4 times in that end of that song. Yeah, it's great. I trying to remember that was used in a movie to great effect as well, and just how weird of a song that is too. Yeah, don't tell that ant that he can't get that rubber tree plant, man, because he's going to have that high hopes, and eventually he's the little engine or the little ant that could. So yeah, I guess it's way more than half this episode, because it's about 6-7 minutes into this that Harris comes in completely blotto. It's very quick that he has lost his case, and that he is going to have to pay all of the money to that shyster.
Good old Ripner.
Oh man, oh man.
Oh my God. He comes in drunk and he says, remember those 2 bottles of Lafitte 1929 I had? So the beauty of that, where you now immediately, right?
This is a great joke, yes.
Immediately we all assume he's not going to allow Ripner to get those 2 bottles of wine, so he's going to get drunk on these 2 bottles of wine. And no, he pours them down. He pours them down the sink and got drunk on, what was it that he got drunk on?
Gin, yes.
Gin. Oh my God.
Oh, he's going to have the worst hangover in the world too.
Everything about, and like Chris said earlier, when he is drunk, before he goes to lie down, Barney takes his pearl-handled revolver from him, so that when Olkowitz does start singing, he immediately looks for it.
But that moment when Barney has him laid down, I mean, this is this episode encapsulates so many of the things that I love about this show, which is so much of the camaraderie between these guys. He lays him down on his couch in his office, and then he goes and he gets a freaking blanket out of the bottom drawer of that filing cabinet. I love that. And then I also love that, he's talking, I think, with Wojo, barely any Dietrich in this episode, but talking with Wojo, and he's like, yeah, I got to write him up, but nobody's going to see the report.
Right.
So I appreciate that they're looking out for their friend who is desperately in need in this episode.
Yeah.
And it's actually one of the interactions between Barney and Harris that doesn't feel as tense, because they've been pretty tense since Suits or uniforms. Yes. Yeah. Since Suits. Yeah. Since uniform days. And they actually again, Harris has a point here. Obviously. I mean, look, three white guys shouldn't have to tell you, but Harris does. Like the racial politics of what's going on is like, it goes back to the idea of the Harris incident all over again, where it's like this guy who is African-American cannot get it across to the other white guys of the precinct what it is like to be him. And no one ever will be able to, because that is not something that any of us can live or experience. It really has to be lived. And I like that they even go into that territory again in this episode, because again, it just goes back to reinforcing some of the themes that the show has been playing with essentially the whole time, really. Probably since like second season, maybe not the first season, but definitely the second season.
But I love what they do, how they have this very serious moment with him talking about, being kept down by the system. And then he starts to talk about his dad and lays out what his dad was doing. Then he talks about his mom and lays out what his mom was doing. And then he just goes, I am a damn good writer. He's been making that stuff up whole cloth, absolute bullshit. And I just like, that is great that they're able to take something so serious and then put the joke on it without cheapening the experience. It's like in any other show, it'd be like, well, how much of that was real? Was it even the stuff about him being kept down because he's black? No, at a certain point, he switches gears and it is bullshit, but the rest of it is so real that he almost has to switch into bullshit mode to be able to soften it and to be able to live with it.
Right. Well, again, he wrote his book, and then he got it taken away from him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, but so Barney says to him very softly after he gives him that story, he's like, I didn't know that. And then he's like, I made that up.
Which is that moment of antagonism between the two of them. Like,
and he says, I'm a damn good writer. But then again, Barney, the Solomon of the 12, he says, when was the last time you wrote anything?
Yeah.
And
I love that. I love that. And they've waited enough time too that he can say that. It's not like, like hitting him with that right away.
Which not clucking his tongue at him.
Exactly. And be like, oh, well, you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps now. And it's like, no, he takes the time and he says it the right way.
You've heard that phrase too? Pull up by your bootstrap. I fucking hate that shit. I mean, that's one of those things that's said all the time, right? And like you said, they give it enough time so it doesn't seem patronizing, which is how it could totally sound. And that's the other thing. I don't think Barney has really ever come off as patronizing with anybody. But that's a very narrow line to walk, because that kind of character in this kind of show can seem extremely patronizing, if not just like the most like tongue-clucking shrew asshole who looks down at everybody else. Barney's never been that. And here's another moment showing, again, people who write the show know how to write it, and they write it well, and they give it that beat, that moment to breathe, so that it isn't, again, him seeming like a dickhead talking down to Harris, which the optics of that aren't great either. So I'm glad that they didn't go there.
Well, and in terms of Mike's reference to how this episode is something of a cliffhanger, I will just tell you from my omniscient viewpoint that you'll see kind of the answers to some of these things in the beginning of season 8.
I'm kind of glad for that, because I was afraid it was going to do the old sitcom thing that we've talked about before and just drop it and maybe make a little mention, but then, just carry on and not have any sort of
in this particular case, no, it will not.
Isn't that right, Armin Tamzarian? What? Yes. We will never speak of this again. Yeah, they don't Armin Tamzarian, blood on the badge, which is good. Well, because it's been such a big part of this season. I mean, this season has almost been the blood on the badge season. If there has been a story arc to this season, like you would expect from a contemporary TV show, that is the story arc. The overarching story of this season is the blood on the badge, the book coming out, then him getting sued, then him having to appeal, and then ultimately at the end of the season, it's like, shit out of luck. But right. to the point that Barney makes, it's like there is some looking up, because Harris still has the ability to be creative, to do creative things, especially on the fly. This is a good episode. We haven't even talked about the Rollo Tomasi of it all yet.
No, which is funny, because back in the episode Vestss that we talked about so long ago, I was saying, was that who was looking up that information? Who was helping out? The guy in the cage, and I was thinking it was Dietrich, but no, it's Dietrich in this one, because we have the guy in the cage, and the guy in the cage in this case is Martin Garner. And it's Martin Golden, just because he wanted to remember his name. Walter Olkowitz plays Walter Cushing, so he wanted to remember his name. But James Cromwell plays Jason Parrish, so he had range. Cromwell is almost up to 200 credits on IMDb right now, which is amazing to me. That mofo is still making stuff. He's got like 5 things in development right now. It's amazing. And he's back playing basically the character that he's played before, like dipshit government type official. I don't think he's working for the government, but he's working for other governments, some overseas governments. Because
he's a lawyer. He's a counsel for the
Liberty Bell company. Holdings, which is Saudi or Kuwaiti and German and French holdings. Would never have known by the name. which is one of the best gags in the entire season. Yeah,
Martin Garner, who likes to walk from his apartment to his place of business. He runs a newsstand, and then he gets basically arrested because he's trespassing across the property of Liberty Holdings with their new construction. I was really surprised that they didn't get into, because towards the end they start making, after Dietrich does his digging and it's like, oh no, he's well within his rights to sue you. Like he could basically have your building destroyed if he wanted to. It's basically amazing legal somersaults they're doing here,
right? Because he walked that same route for 20 years, he has created an easement in the eyes of the law, so that technically speaking, it's a little far-fetched, but it was the law. I mean, it was by the book, literally, because Harris looked it up in the law book, and of course Garner ends up garnering some
Oh, good one.
Some nice goodies out of it for him. He gets a newsstand inside the new building. He gets a trip to Europe and a female companion.
The thing that I was going to say is this idea of him getting space inside of the building is really interesting to me, because I know in New York City, a lot of buildings have more public areas for the first floor, and that almost feels like that is coming out of something like this, where we are not, you can walk through the building. You can walk, like you're not barred from being in the building if you walk through the bottom floor, because it's open and it's there for people. And it feels like kind of a result of something like this, where it's like, you can't just create these massive structures and not allow people to walk through, rather than always having to walk around.
Well, you know something, that it's interesting that you say that, because years back, I was in New York in 86. I was there for a few months when I did an internship. And yes, there were those newsstands inside the building, some of the buildings. And just the other day, I don't know if it was on Facebook or on something else I was reading, but someone did one of those photos where they took a picture from the opening credits of the television show The Odd Couple, when Felix and Oscar are sitting on the bench in the park eating or something. And they took another picture currently from the same vantage point, although obviously Felix and Oscar aren't there anymore. And what was I mean, it shouldn't be amazing to me, but it was kind of amazing to me. That show ran from 70 to 75. That particular shot was not from the first season. I know that, so I don't know when it was taken. But so the picture was taken sometime in the early 70s. There are a lot more building there now than there was even in 1970s. And by the 70s, the skyscraper age was well underway. So they just keep, like you're saying, like they used up so much of the space on the street, because if you watch all the old movies and stuff, or see pictures in Life magazines, yeah, all these newsstands were on the street before.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's still, you look at Superman 2 or even Superman 1, when you've got but especially in Superman 2 with the big fight with Zodnon and Ursa, it's all the newsstands just being blown away and stuff. So that might have also been the thing. They might have said, like, we can't afford another Kryptonian attack. We need to be inside of these buildings now.
Well, you're probably right. That makes more sense.
We can ill afford another Kryptonian attack. Yeah, that ends up being a pretty interesting B story. I mean, obviously the A story, Harris all the way. And then I don't remember if we really have a C story in this particular episode.
I don't think we do.
Oh, no. It's Walter. It's Walter.
Oh, it's Walter, the singing guy. Right, yeah. Right.
Yeah, but it integrates so well that it feels like all three of these stories touch each other. I mean, the Garner stuff and the Harris stuff are a little separate, but they're tied together by the Walter stuff, I suppose.
And another thing about the Walter stuff, where he explains he's in a type of therapy now where they have him sing. Basically, it's to help overcome anxiety and meet people, and like a social anxiety thing. So he sings to overcome it. The other thing I really liked, there's that scene where he's coming back, I think, from Pictures and Prints or something, and he's saying to Wojo how, people used to sing in the movies, but now, and everyone would join in. No one does that anymore, blah, blah, blah. So he starts singing again. I think it's The Hills Are Alive with the Sound of Music. At one point, he starts to step in because Wojo is putting him into the cage. And when he starts singing The Hills Are Alive with Sound of Music, he puts his arm around Martin Garner, trying to get him to join in. And then he steps back out of the cage. Wojo doesn't do anything. And he's singing to all of them. Barney comes out and nobody says anything. And then he just like quietly backs himself into the cage. I thought that was wonderful, because they're not like pushing him into the cage and saying to shut up. The other thing that I thought was a little unfair is I always remember how Barney didn't like has this happened yet, or is it in season 8? Maybe I shouldn't. Has the guy who's played his hands happened yet?
No, not yet. Like,
oh, okay, never mind.
Magic Mike from Weird Al's band, does he make an appearance?
No.
Okay.
No, so it must be in season 8, and it's a fun episode too. But yeah, I just like the fact that it's the kinder, gentler police force.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm very curious to see how they wrap up this Harris stuff or what they do in season 8, because like I said, this is the first time we've had a season with a real cliffhanger. Like, we talk about all these two-parter episodes. It's not like the old Star Trek's The Next Generation days where it was part 1 is the final episode, the final episode of the season is the part 1 of the 2-part episode,
right?
And we're waiting to find out what happens after Riker says fire on the Borg cube that's being piloted by Locutus.
Barncutus of Miller. There's none of that. Wojo's like, please turn on the screen, and Hal Linda just turns around and he's just a Borg. There's none of that.
Right. And there's that eye, like the laser hits the camera right there.
Missed opportunity, really.
Yes. We are Barncutus.
Barncutus
Resistance is futile.
Oh,
and
God.
then you got Luger in the back there. Yeah. Listen to what he says. You end up like Brownie.
I will just say this, and that is, in my opinion, Harris has one of the very best storylines in this entire series in terms of how it comes full circle next season.
Well, it feels very organic the way that this is played out, in a way that feels more like the way a contemporary sitcom would have this kind of story. You have it based on what he's already doing, and then they've laid the track, and they lay the track a little bit more, and then they're just off to the races in this season is what it feels like. And it's been really the last 3 seasons. I mean, 6, 7 and 8, because 6 is where the idea starts originally. But it's surprising, because I would not have expected this kind of thing in this kind of show, based solely not on the writing, but based on the time and the other kinds of writing practices that everybody was observing.
6 is where what starts? Because
Blood on the Badge.
Blood on the Badge.
They mention it, don't they?
He starts the book before that, though, doesn't he?
I'm not sure how far back it goes. It feels like he was writing more magazine stories before, and getting, it was tough for him to get copies in the magazines and these kind of things. I don't think he was doing Blood. Yeah, to Chris's point, I think it was later than 4. I think it was 5. Yeah,
because there was that that scene that was very similar to the X-Files with the cigarette smoking man thing, where it's like, oh, your story is in a nudie mag, essentially, the Romana Clef thing, like that. They even did that, but I don't think it. I think was it serialized Blood on the Badge, maybe? Because that was the thing. Like, I don't know. He's been writing this whole time, or they've been alluding to him wanting, having higher aspirations. That's the thing. I think it's actually surprising. For the most part, he is the only one who has really gotten a holdover story, because the Wojciechowicz getting promoted, like, it's been fucking a season at least since we've seen him even mention that.
Well, he got the promotion. And
is that what it is? Okay, so it's just there's it's Barney that never got the promotion, right?
Right, which he is also very angry about in this episode. Thank you, Chris. I forgot all about that. That whole because he's talking about, God, I forgot this whole storyline.
No, I don't think it was in this.
It was in the previous episode.
Oh, okay. Well, gosh, we missed that with Vestss. This whole thing. That's right. God, that was the most important part of the whole episode, is that he posts that position to, what is it, Vice.
It wasn't even Vestss, it was the Rainmaker.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, because he posts that position and everybody's trying for it. And who is it that comes in? Oh, it's Wojo that comes in last, but he doesn't know that he's last. He thinks he's the only person that it's applying for this.
Right.
I was glad that Levitt's just like, well, if people move on, keep me in mind. And I mean, Levitt's still banging that drum, but he's banging it in such a better tune these days than he was the first few times he was on, where it was like, get rid of this guy.
Wait a minute. It has to be in Vestss, because it was when Luger was trying to get their bios.
Really?
He talks about Barney having so much of a life. I don't have anybody. I've never really had much of a life. I don't have any kids. I don't have any. I thought that's why it was.
It's split up. They split it up into the 2 episodes. It isn't.
Wow.
Because the Rainmaker, we talked about the Rainmaker part of it, but yeah, the idea that we're already seeing them trying to leave.
No. Yeah. I know what it was. It's in Vestss that he says, I can't even get what do you call it? To be inspector or deputy inspector or something like that.
Right.
I've been turned down 3 times or something like that. And then in the Rainmaker, when the 3 of them put in for a transfer to Vice, he says, well, what does it matter? Because you're all going to leave and I'm going to be stuck here anyway.
That's right.
So you're right. They kind of split it up. The feeling of anger is kind of split.
Which is surprising with this show. Because again, that's something tracking from episode to episode, which again, the show, it's not that the show hasn't done it, but one of our longest running in-jokes on this podcast is where's Mike? Because that, again, they never hang a lantern on the fact that, hey, Mike, how you doing? This fucking guy never comes back.
Oh, my God, let it go, Christian.
I refuse.
About this from the
refuse. It was the second season. Well, I could talk about how they've mismanaged Barbara Barry some more, but since she's not on the show at all, who cares, right? Clearly nobody other than me.
By the way, Mike was, oh God, who was that great character actor's name? My friend
Art Matrano.
Tim Madigan. Yeah, I'm going to say Tim Madigan's going to be angry at me. I'm forgetting Art Matrano's name.
But again, that's just, again, to point out that we don't expect this show to have carryover from episode to episode. I mean, sometimes the names on the board are names of people we've seen before. Sometimes they're not. But it is interesting this season and the last season, there definitely feels like more of a concerted effort to have something through lining through the season, which again feels a little bit more contemporary, which I appreciate.
Well, again, obviously, if you read the book, I think Danny Arnold was a genius. But here again, he's not here in season 6 and 7. And you have younger men writing it. All of those guys learned most of what they knew from Danny, but they were still, it was still coming through a different lens. And Danny was more old school comedy writing. So that could be an explanation for that. So as much as they missed the mark with Homicide, they made up for it in other areas, maybe.
Well, and again, I think, it's interesting because Harris ends up getting that story that ends up being the story. And I mean, look, of all the characters in the show, I think it would be not even unfair to say it, but I think he has shown the most growth as a character. Really, Wojciechowicz kind of stagnated around the end of season 5, midway through season 6. He's kind of not been as important of a character to the show as some of the other characters have, and especially Harris. But Harris has had a lot of time devoted to his storylines throughout a lot of the show, but definitely this season. I mean, whole episodes have been about him pretty much.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I really thought when we were first talking about this show back in the early seasons, I really thought and had remembered it being much more of Barney being a father figure to Wojo and Wojo growing through this whole thing. But yeah, I would say you're right. For the last season and a half or more, it has been more. I don't want to say the Harris show because it's definitely just shared, but he has really come to prominence in a fantastic way.
Yeah. Look, Ron Glass is an amazing actor. So they picked the right person. But if they had picked any of the characters, there was a lot of Ron Carey there for a while. And that was not unwelcome either. I mean, there was a season, was it season 2 or 3, that was all fish. It was Abe Vigoda heavy. Every joke went through Abe Vigoda's character. So... And I think season 5 was Landisberg, when he would every joke was punctuated by him doing something. So this for sure has definitely been Harris's season. I guess the question that I have is, as we bring this season to a close, what will the last season look like? Because God, I can't believe we're here already. It is kind of insane. I mean, this is the longest show you and I have ever done together, Mike. I mean, this is 7 seasons of television that we've worked
through. That may be the case, but I'll tell you what, that especially in the last year of Twilight Zone 85, Dreams for Sale felt like the longest show we ever did together.
Fair. In terms of the quality of what we were watching versus the quality of the conversation, you're right. That show didn't deserve nearly as much time as we gave it. That's the thing. Barney Miller is more than deserving for, even like you've alluded to, Otto, this being kind of a season that maybe doesn't succeed as much as the others. Still a great season of television.
Yeah, definitely.
Throughout. I mean, this show is just great. I mean, for the most part, every episode of this show is good. I mean, even the bad episodes, are few and far between. To be fair, though, the bad episodes of this show are really bad. Wojo's girl being like the absolute bottom of the barrel, if not subterranean. But I'm curious where season 8 goes, because I don't know. I feel like I'm already kind of bittersweet with the show, given that we're moving into the last season, but I'm so invested in the characters. I really want to see where this show kind of sends everybody, because it's gonna be weird to watch the final episode of this show. And like I kind of alluded to in the opening, this is the last time, before the actual last time, that we get to talk about an entire season of the show, because next time we do it, there will be nothing else to talk about. So,
well, I'll just tell you that while you will know, for the most part, not entirely, but while you'll certainly get a good idea of where they're all going, you won't really see them. So I hope you're not expecting that.
No, I don't know. I don't expect any of that.
Right, but you will know for the most part where they're all going. And I don't want to be too presumptuous, but if you guys want to invite me back for the final trilogy, because the show ends on a trilogy.
Oh, I like how you're like, if,
yeah, you're already on the schedule. So
yeah, we were probably thinking about having you and Richard Haddam on the same episode, because this has kind of been, when it's the only other guest we've had on this show other than you is Richard. So. And it's kind of been at the end of the season for you and at the beginning of the season for him. So it's like, why don't we just bring the best of both worlds? Speaking of Star Trek.
We'll talk off the air about any other possibilities.
But yeah, I'm excited to see what the 8th season brings, because again, we've never spent as much time with characters on a show as we have with this show.
So I will tell you right now, you being the listener, not Chris and Otto, I'll tell you right now that we have 7 more episodes of Barney Miller discussion ahead of us.
Wow.
Though we have an 8th episode in the hopper. Well, not in the hopper yet, but it's in the works, let's say. We're going to come back next month and we're going to talk about fish. I figured it's been enough time. We're going to have to do it. We happened upon the 2nd season of the show, so it's now available to us. So I don't know how we're going to do this, Chris. It might be some thumb wrestling or something, but I'm not going to watch all the episodes. You're not going to watch all the episodes.
Well, hold on now. Don't presume that I won't. You, on the other hand, have made a case that you're not going to. If I watch all of them, I might show up and I'm just here, just my eyes have glazed over. Do you watch fish? I've been driven insane by the cosmic horror of fish.
As someone who has seen all the episodes, let me just say this to you, Chris. If you do watch all the episodes, you might want to think about getting some mental health counseling for masochism, because you'll definitely have a deep masochistic streak in you if you're able to watch all of them.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, I already alluded to it. Like, Abe Vigoda's comedic stylings have moved so far out. Like, I know, Otto, when I said he was an asshole, I probably should have clarified why. I don't want to hear about how much you hate your wife anymore, dude. Like, give it a rest. Like, Henny Youngman did it better than you. Come on. Like, Henny Youngman did it best. And Abe Vigoda, that's the thing. It was like they didn't understand what made fish funny. So they just went to the barrel of he hates his wife. And it's like, we are well aware. If anything, this motherfucker's just gone about every other sentence saying, I hate my wife. Seriously.
First of all,
seriously.
wait a minute. You're wrong.
Oh, here we go.
He doesn't hate his wife. He loves his wife. He speaks horribly about his wife.
Right.
He doesn't hate her. Again, and I know this is, this goes back to the beginning for you and I, Chris. It's of its time.
Oh, I get it. No, I appreciate. That's why I said Henny Youngman did it better, because it is of a time. Like, it's
of a time, because I always used to say I never liked what's her name, Joan Rivers, because all the jokes were about her husband, and I didn't really care for that much about all the comics who made jokes just about their wife. It's not a great, it's a vein that gets overdone, really.
Yeah. Right. No, I mean, I get what they're getting at,
but
but
he
like,
doesn't hate his wife.
No,
he loves Bernice.
Sure, but again, sure.
The lip service goes a little too far. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right,
I get it, bro.
exactly.
But like, fucking come on. Like, look, let me put it this way. While I appreciate he probably loves his wife, if I met someone who talked about their spouse that way, I'd be like, why are you fucking still married? You seem like a miserable asshole. Like, and your spouse might make you a miserable asshole even. So, I mean, again, it's just there was so much more comedy to mine in the show. And on top of everything else, it goes back to something that I have talked about plenty of times, which is the spouses and the kids and the romantic interests ain't got a soul to fucking go to bat for them on this show about it. Like, nobody cares about that with this show. I don't care about it. You don't care about it. Mike doesn't care about it. Nobody cares about their lives outside of the precinct. And it was made apparent that that was the case, because anytime they have people who are family or related or, again, significant others, when they show up, it's like the show grinds to a halt, because I don't care what they're like outside of the precinct, because they haven't done enough to justify. They've never even gone about really showing it. The amount of times they've shown the outside of the precinct can be counted on probably two hands at this point. Shit, the amount of times we've seen anything other than the same 2 or 3 shots in the precinct can be counted on one hand, because we've seen the inside of the bathroom one time in 8 seasons. One time. The same time we found out they apparently have a cleaning lady at the same time. So, don't forget, I mean, they don't bother themselves with bullshit they don't need to, which helps with this show's approach and the timelessness. It's like, I don't care about the sex lives of people in the 70s, and the show doesn't care either.
Right. You said it. The writers didn't care about everyone else's family. It was only a workplace comedy, and one of the best workplace comedies ever. I'll say the one thing, though, about the bathroom. Why do we only see the bathroom once? Simple. Again, this goes back to really early comedy writing. This goes back to radio comedy writing, because what we imagine in our mind the bathroom to be is far funnier than whatever we could see when we see the bathroom. So they kind of broke that for us, because of course Fish's humor was not just about his wife. What else was it about? It was about his age and
him being old. Him being old,
and all his sickness and ailments and all that stuff. So,
Which they did. They did kind of even go there. I mean, they went there in that episode. Even they had those moments too,
right?
Of like, oh, I'm old. Like
But I got bad news for you, Chris. If you don't like,
I know, right? Don't watch more of Fish.
Yes.
I was like, this doesn't bode well for the guy who said he's going to watch all of Fish, does it?
Now he's going. Now he's going home. He's living with Bernice.
Yeah,
24/7.
Oh boy, and children too. I hope there's a dog in that show. Even God, kids and animals in the same show.
Yeah, it's rough. It's rough.
Boy. Well, until we come back with that, Chris, what are you working on these days?
Well, working on apparently finding a new brain if I'm going to spend any amount of time with Fish. When I'm not torturing myself with Abe Vigoda spinoff TV shows, you can find the Culture Cast and so many other audio delicacies at weirdingwaymedia.com, including this show, Kolchak, the Kolchak tapes, which is what this show originally was, the show that's going to come after this one, and everything Mike and I work on can be found at weirdingwaymedia.com. What about you, Otto Bruno?
Well, I'm going to be on an upcoming episode of Film Foundation.
Actually, it's already out.
Oh, it is?
Came out came out 2 days ago. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Chris, because you didn't send me that either.
Yeah, I didn't. I forgot. You're right. that is on me. You're right.
Mike, how did you train this guy? Come on.
It's not a matter of training.
Well, so
yes.
you notice today when I messaged you, can't wait to talk with you guys tonight.
I was about to say, who's throwing the aspersions here? I knew we were recording tonight. Otto.
Yeah.
Otto.
But
Yes.
I was showing young Chris that I was teaching him a very important lesson, that you can't count on us oldsters to remember shit, even if it's on our calendar.
Who was professional enough to send out the reminder?
I have
the guy with the gray beard.
I have 3 reminders on all of my events that I send on the calendar, 3 days ahead of time, 24 hours ahead of time, and 10 minutes ahead of time. But again, one would know that if they saw it on their calendar. Again, I'm not casting aspersions, I'm just asking questions, as they would say,
Anyway, I had a wonderful time with Chris and Ryan on Film Foundations. We talked about the Thin Man series. And actually, within the week, I will be sending in my the manuscript for my second book, which is a baseball book that at this point is entitled Reunion at Home and should be out next year from McFarland. And then I'm working on some other things that I don't know yet.
What about you, Mike?
What about you, Mikey?
Yeah, for me, everything is available at weirdingwaymedia.com, where you can listen to this show. You can listen to a lot of shows, Chris's show, my show. Otto, if you had a show, we'd hope that you would find a home here at weirdingwaymedia.com instead of being too big for your britches and going off to another podcast network.
Oh, he's going to hear this, right? I mean, fair.
Would I ever
he listens to this show, right?
Would I ever go to another network?
No.
If you knew people more famous than us, you might.
Yeah, that's probably true. If they paid me something, but I don't think you're allowed to make any money if you're in podcasting, are you?
Well, not enough money to claim with the IRS, that's for sure. I mean, what?
Yeah.
Who else is listening to this show?
James Cromwell.
Yeah. Like, Zach Galifianakis. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you so much to everybody for listening. Thanks to John Walker for our opening theme song. And just keep going out there, pounding the beat. Come on back in a month when you'll hear us talk about some fish.